hesitation, we'll go ahead and get this kicked off. Again, thank you to everyone for being able to join our Sharpen Your Skills case study. Obviously based on the implications of low HDS scores. Patricia has done some amazing work putting together this fictitious profile for all of us to be able to kind of follow along and ask questions and make those connections. So without further ado, again, thank you very much for being able to join. The questions can be added into the chat room, and the case study you should have received it about a half an hour ago into the inbox that you signed up with. Patricia, over to you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm really happy to be able to lead this webinar with all of you. I see some, like I said, some familiar names in our attendees list and also some new names. So hopefully we have the chance to connect after the webinar. So for those of you who don't know me, of course, my name is Patricia Barata. I'm an expert in talent assessments, and I facilitate our Hogan Assessment certification workshops along with my colleague Anitza, who's here today, but she's just in the background and she'll be answering your questions in the Q&A. My background, I have a PhD in organizational psychology, and I am a coactive trained coach. Okay, so thank you for joining us for Sharpen Your Skills. Really our intent here is to reach out to our community of certified Hogan individuals to help you to get more comfortable and interpreting low HDS scores specifically. And so we've put together a fun case study for you about a fictitious individual named Samantha. And you'll see in the document that was sent to your email, you'll see her Hogan inventories as well. And so we'll walk through the case study together with that special focus on those low HDS scores. And we'll talk about really walking through the Hogan inventories to analyze them using the context of low HDS scores and in the context of the case study. And then thinking ahead to, what are we seeing as Samantha's strengths and areas of improvement? And also what might be some developmental tips or recommendations that we might give her. So there will be different points in our webinar today where I will invite you to use the chat. The Q&A is intended for questions, whereas the chat is meant to be more interactive. And so I'll just prompt you during those moments where I want to invite you to share your insights with us and everyone else in the webinar. Okay, so let's start with what's in a low score. And in more recent years, Hogan has started to take a closer look at low scores in the HDS. So anything below the 20th percentile. And so you might remember Hogan saying, high scores are what can get you fired. And he adds that low scores are what can get us passed over. And so this brings us to an important point about derailers, which is really that they are a pattern of behaviors. And within that pattern, there are negative behaviors, of course. That's why we refer to them as derailers and why we focus on them. But there are also positive elements that we can use to our advantage, assuming that we don't go over the top. And I will use the excitable derailer as an example. And so we can all think of, someone that we've, witnessed having an excitable moment. And so they might talk really fast, they might use a lot of hand gestures, they might use very passionate language, but when they go over the top and they cross the line, this is when they start, yelling, banging on the desk, throwing things, etc. So both of these different kind of clusters of behaviors, they both belong or accompany each other with a high excitable score. But what we'll notice is that there's a cluster, banging on the desk and yelling, that's, derailing at that point. And there's another cluster that's actually acceptable. There are positive elements to using words that convey passion, right? And so that's the idea that we're getting at here, that there's, a certain kind of number of acceptable behaviors that accompany a derailer. And so that's really the concept that helps us to understand kind of low HDS scores as well, where the essence of a low HDS score are that there are an absence of those acceptable behaviors. So whereas we can talk about a high HDS score as an overused strength, a low HDS score could be underused. And so let's use excitable as an example. So someone with a low score would speak with flat affect, an even tone, doesn't convey emotions through their facial expressions, So we can see here, we have the absence of those acceptable behaviors like talking with passion, talking at a kind of a faster pace. And so this might be someone that has, trouble kind of energizing a team and conveying that sense of urgency. So that's the concept, the essence of a low HDS score. And so with that in mind, now that we have that foundation, we can start to walk through our case study together. So I will invite you to open up the document that we had sent you, which will detail the case study. You're welcome to kind of read that, follow along. But with this webinar format, what I'll do is I'll start to extract what I see as the key pieces of the case study. And so when we look through the case study, we see that Samantha is a litigation lawyer. And the context is that she's being considered as part of this organization succession management planning to potentially move into a director role, so the director of legal claims. And so what we're really curious to know about this case study is, what's different? So what might be required of her at that director level position that's not required of her right now? So that's what we're curious about. We're also curious to know, what is Samantha's reputation as well? And so when we look through the case study, we start to kind of pull out some elements. And so we start to kind of get a sense for her reputation, her strengths, what is enabling her to excel in her current role, and a little bit about her style. So we see that she's someone who's very rigorous. So we know from the case it says that she is relied on for her ability to conduct exhaustive research and carefully evaluate risk. So much so that she has prevented, cases from going to court. So there's that risk aversion there. So playing it safe. We know that she's seen as very thorough and prepared. So that's one aspect. We also can extract, she's very collaborative. She's someone that voluntarily jumps in to mentor summer articling students. So we see that in her profile too. And we also can kind of pick out from the context in terms of her reputation. She probably has a very strong reputation within her current team because she's seen as someone who can get things done, deliver high quality work under tight deadlines. So we see that she's a bit of a doer with probably a higher stress management. And we know that the context of her current team, she works alongside other lawyers. And in this context, we see that, her and her colleagues, they're very collegial. Most of them have graduated from the same kind of one or two law schools in the area. So it's a very tight knit, very close community. So very collaborative, people know each other very well, maybe more informal. And we see in the context, we see based on our understanding of the legal claims team, we know that her team is pretty much isolated from the rest of the organization. They kind of live in their own little bubble there. And Samantha's manager, who's the current director, kind of is very protective and shields them from the highly political nature of this organization. So she's kind of operating within her own bubble right now, but doing very well. And so now we're considering, okay, well, what might be different at that next level? So we find a copy of a job description, and we learn that, for this next role, she would need to build a high-performing team by really developing people, coaching them, giving feedback, holding them accountable. She would be expected to contribute to the vision and the strategy and direction of that legal claims team. And we also expect her to build partnerships across the organization, right? And really bring that strong client focus. So we see that there is, starting to be a shift to this new context. So maybe shifting from more of a doer role to being more strategic, we're seeing as well. And we know that she would be leading a team of 12 to 16 people. So part of our curiosity is to know, given where she is right now, let's say we were to move her into that position tomorrow, what might her reputation be that she would build for herself in that new context? And so we know from this case study, it says, after speaking to other senior leaders, we learned that, she's not really known well at this point in time, but those who do know her find her to be, almost too open and too trusting. And too forward and too comfortable with others, we'll say. So other people kind of doubt her, credibility or professionalism within this context and political astuteness. So we're starting to pull out those elements from the case. And so once we have a really, as solid as an understanding as we can with this fictitious case study, that's when we start to get curious about, okay, well, how does this case study context align, with her Hogan inventories? So what are the connections that we can start to make between what we see in the case study context and what we see in the data? And this is where I would invite you to go to the next page of that document to look at her Hogan inventories. And so the next step here is, again, to start to make those connections. So I'm not going to walk you through an analysis or how to interpret the profile at this point. We'll get to that. But first, we're kind of warming up right now. So first, what we'll start to do is we'll walk through each inventory one by one, and I'll just make, quick connections. So quick connections between where I'm seeing compatibility between her Hogan inventories and the case study context. And I would invite you, as I go through each inventory, for you to also make those connections. And I'll start by giving you an example so you know what I mean. So let's look at her HPI. We see that she has a lot of extreme scores. Prudence, for example, is 99th percentile. And if we were to connect that to the case, that makes a lot of sense when we think about the case, because, she's known to be very thorough, very prepared, risk averse, very conscientious. So that doer profile. And that's consistent with what we read in that case. So that's one example of what I mean by making a connection. If you notice connections on your own, which I'm sure you will, you're invited to write those in the chat. Okay. We also notice high interpersonal sensitivity and sociability. So, at first glance, that also makes sense to us. We see she's very collaborative. She likes to work alongside others. She's jumping in to mentor these summer articling students. So that makes sense. The high adjustment makes sense from what we saw. So someone who, works under pressure, delivers under tight deadlines. So that high prudence, high adjustment. We also see a connection with the inquisitive and learning approach, and not a connection per se, but we just know that it's kind of giving us some insight into potential development for her, because she needs to move towards being more strategic, but we see a strong doer profile right now, someone who's more operational, more hands-on. Okay. There is a document that is available, and it's attached to the email that you use to register for the webinar. So you're welcome to open that and follow along, where you'll find the case study context. So now let's look at the HDS. So we look at the HDS, right away we see one derailer, so dutiful, perhaps not surprising because she has a collaborative relationship with her manager and she seems to esteem her manager, and vice versa. We also notice at first glance some low scores on the HDS, so low skeptical, low reserved, not surprising because we see her as someone who's very collaborative, who's very open, and has a very trusting nature. Okay, and now let's go to the MVPI. So we'll notice, for example, high altruism, high affiliation. So, that mentoring aspect that we saw of Samantha, maybe that's driven by that desire to help others. The high affiliation. So right now it seems like her current context is a good fit because it's a very tight-knit, close community of lawyers. So that high affiliation need is probably met there. And we see low power and low recognition. And so, someone who might not naturally step into that leadership position or really desire to be in that high visibility role. And so we know from the case study, it said, people don't really know her very well. So senior leaders don't really know that much of her. And so, if she were to onboard or transition into this role, what can we do to create some visibility around her? And probably give some insight into her leadership style, maybe someone who's more facilitative or consultative in their approach to leading others. Okay, if you notice other connections, of course, that you want to make, then you're welcome to do so in the chat. And I see that there's a couple of questions, like does her high adjustment impact her ability to build a team? I'll just speak kind of more broadly, and Kevin, I recognize your name. You're welcome to kind of put some clarification there if you'd like to, but some of the watch outs with the high adjustment, I'm not sure what you mean by ability to build a team per se. Sometimes the watch out with high adjustment is not necessarily being kind of sensitive to other people's stress, right? So being overly optimistic. But we know that with the high altruism, the high interpersonal sensitivity, that's not something that I would be concerned about. She's probably quite kind and sympathetic to other people's needs. And because she has the low power, high altruism, high interpersonal sensitivity, she's probably going to be someone who creates a culture of psychological safety where people will feel comfortable coming to her with their needs. And the high hedonism contradict or negatively impact her job as a lawyer. Well, high hedonism can be two things. It could be, I want to have fun at work. And so maybe for her, this is fun, right? And we know that she's part of a tight-knit kind of community with other lawyers. So within that context, she could still be meeting her needs for fun. Maybe there's more opportunity for her to collaborate as well. Or it can be that need for a strong work-life balance. Okay, all right. So I hope that answers your questions, Kevin. So we kind of we warmed up, we started making the connections between the inventories and the case study, but now we will jump into our analysis. So how to connect these three inventories in order to interpret her profile within the context of this role. And so I will walk you through one potential way that you can approach your analysis. Noting that this is not the only way that you can analyze a Hogan profile. If you are already very experienced with Hogan inventories, I'm sure you've already come up with your own way to approach your analysis. And I know that Hogan kind of recommends different ways as well. So this is one framework that you can use. And so in this framework, what we'll do is we'll use the HPI as a building block. So this is our foundation. We're starting with the HPI. And our goal here is to start chunking information. So we want to start to pull out themes. So we're going to pull out themes from the HPI. And then for each theme, we'll go to the HDS and say, okay, is there anything from the HDS that adds to our understanding of this theme? And then we'll go to the MVPI and say, okay, is there anything here that nuances our understanding of this theme? The themes that we will use are already provided by Hogan. And so Hogan already provides a framework for kind of chunking the dimensions on the HPI. So we know that, adjustment and ambition, we can chunk that into the theme of energy and drive. Sociability and interpersonal sensitivity give us insight into someone's relationship and communication style. And prudence, inquisitive, and learning approach can give us insight into someone's problem solving and learning style. So these are the three themes that we will work with. Okay, so now let's go to Samantha's profile. Let's work with our HPI. And so when we look at her HPI, we see that her most extreme score, although all of her scores are extreme, or almost all of them, I will say, but her most extreme one is interpersonal sensitivity. So we can start there. So knowing that we are chunking together sociability and interpersonal sensitivity to give insight into someone's relationship and communication style, our theme could be, this is someone with a lot of breadth and depth in their relationship and communication style. So this is someone who is socially proactive, who's engaging and socially self-confident, but also probably approaches relationships in a way that are based on trust, consideration, and support, and aiming to build those long-term relationships. So that's the theme that we're extracting from the HPI. So now we go to the HDS and we ask ourselves, is there any information here that adds to our understanding of that theme? And we're going to focus on skeptical and reserved. So both skeptical and reserved, those low scores there below the 20th percentile, can add to our understanding of what we know of her from the HPI. So low skeptical is building on that theme of someone who can build long-term stable relationships based on trust. So this is someone who assumes the best in others, who believes in others, who believes that others have good intentions. And we know that when we give trust to others, they tend to reciprocate. And so that can lead to a positive kind of spiral that positively impacts our ability to maintain and sustain relationships. Okay. Here we would say too that low skeptical people can sometimes be surprised by others with ulterior motives. And so we can already start to think ahead to her development opportunities. And so knowing that she's transitioning into a context that might be more political, or at the very least, we know that she's transitioning from a close-knit, tight community of people who probably have each other's backs to a much broader context with many more key players. And so the underused strength here is, not using that trust but verify approach. So she might not be doing her due diligence when the situation calls for it. Okay, and so, she might right now be able to kind of really navigate relationships well within her current context and build those long-term stable relationships. But should she transition into this role, then we might want to ask her to, or help her develop actually to fine-tune her radar. We can also look at the low reserved, and that adds to our theme of social proactivity and being this kind leader, right? So the low score reflects that person who's more socially engaging, who's warm, relationship oriented, eager to support others, and sympathetic. And so this adds to our understanding of her being kind of very collaborative, probably being very consultative in her approach, and very focused on people. So focused on people in the way that we see her mentoring, articling students. So here we know in terms of kind of the watch out that adds to our understanding, but we know that as she moves into a people leadership position, we might see, someone who is very trusting of her team, who believes in them, sees their strengths, very attentive to their needs. But the watch out there is, maybe avoiding conflict situations, maybe avoiding holding people accountable. And especially with that low skeptical. So people who score like her, we might see her as someone that not only might be hesitant to avoid conflict, but is less likely to perceive kind of weaknesses, so to speak, or overlook people's mistakes in her team because she's more trusting and she sees the best in people. So really starting to create this picture when we think of her reputation as, potentially being someone who is too soft on people issues, potentially. Okay. So now we move on over to the MBPI and we start to look at, what are some other dimensions here that can give us some insight to add or nuance our understanding of this theme that we've created of being socially engaging and also nurturing. And so there are a number of kind of scales that we can focus on. So we see high hedonism and high affiliation. So, not surprising, we see, she wants to work alongside others. She wants to have maybe fun at work, or at least values that work-life balance. Team player, collaborative leader, probably someone who uses a more consultative or facilitative approach. So she really likes to surround herself with others. It kind of adds to her understanding as well in terms of socially engaging and warm, but maybe someone who crosses social boundaries at times, which is consistent with someone who's low reserved. And we can see that with high hedonism too. Sometimes people who score high here blur the lines between kind of fun and work, so to speak. The high power, the high altruism add to that kind of understanding of someone who's nurturing, who's relationship oriented, because with the I think I said high power, but I mean to say low power, is that value of getting along. And the high altruism is putting people first. So that strong people focus and that desire to help others. So we see that really kind of cements our theme of being very relationship oriented. This is someone who cares about getting along with others, who cares about supporting others, and who cares about working alongside others in a team. So we're also we know that she's moving into a position that's kind of more highly visible. She's stepping into a leadership position potentially for the first time. And so we also have that theme of the watch out where we saw before she might not hold people accountable. And we might see that here too with the low power and high altruism. So it's the tendency of the low power to not want to be responsible for others, not naturally moving towards leadership positions. And we might see her prioritizing that group cohesion. and wanting others to kind of get along with each other, be very affiliative with that low power, the high altruism, and even the high affiliation of, really having that goal of, I want us to work alongside others. I want us to kind of support each other. So that's our first theme that we've walked through together. And now we can move to the second theme. So the second theme here being high adjustment and high ambition. And so if we were to kind of succinctly summarize that interaction, we might say a calm, confident, optimistic, and driven leader. And when we go to the HDS to add to our understanding, you might ask, what do I notice here? So what do I notice in the HDS profile that can add to my understanding? And so we notice a low excitable score. And so we know with a low score and excitable, it's, someone who appears to be more relaxed, more emotionally mature, not easily provoked, right? So that adds to that theme of being very calm, seeming to be kind of self-accepting, cool, calm, collected leader, but also to the point of maybe being difficult to read, not being able to generate enough enthusiasm or passion to motivate others, and not being able to demonstrate a sense of urgency. And then we can look at the MVPI to see if there's anything that nuances our understanding. So, the low recognition can nuance our understanding. So we have that vision of a very calm, confident, driven leader, but who might have difficulty expressing that passion to mobilize others. And with the low recognition, we see someone who maybe wants to lead by example, or that steadfast leader who works hard without credit grabbing, wants their work to speak for itself, and probably prefers to build their own team up rather than kind of putting themselves in the spotlight. And so the strengths there, we see probably someone, again, who puts her team at the focus of her attention, but also, not surprising with what we saw in the case study, no one really knows her outside of her team, right? Okay, let's go to our last theme. So when we look at prudence, inquisitive, and learning approach, that gives us insight into someone's problem solving and learning style. So we see here, if we were to summarize this theme, operationally rigorous, a doer, understands implementation well, executes in a careful, rigorous, and systematic way, and prefers to be hands-on and not challenge the status quo. And so when we look then at her HDS, there are two things that I would look at. So first, mischievous. So she has a low score on mischievous, and that adds to our theme of not challenging the status quo in terms of maybe playing it safe to the point of being, very risk averse, right? So really carefully thinking through decisions and avoiding unnecessary risk. But to the point of playing it safe a little bit too much. And then dutiful. That adds to our theme as well, because with high dutiful, we see maybe very conforming, avoids challenging others, especially people in positions of leadership. So kind of adds to what we were seeing in the HPI around not challenging the status quo, careful, cautious decision-making. And then we go to the MVPI and we see, the high security, we see there's a value there in terms of prioritizing kind of structure, stability, and predictability, and minimizing risk. And so we do see with the low tradition, there might be an openness to new ideas, diverse perspectives, but without rocking the boat is what we see in her profile. Okay, so those are the three themes that we would extract. And so if we move to a discussion point, this is where I would invite you to write in the chat or think to yourself, knowing Samantha's profile. So knowing her context and having walked through the three inventories together, what are we seeing to be her main strengths and areas for development? And we want to consider the information presented in the case. So I'll kind of quickly highlight what we had seen. So we had seen, for example, in this role, she needs to contribute to the strategy and the vision. She will be building a high performance team, mainly through a balance of, coaching, developing, but also holding people accountable. And there's a strong relationship component, so that expectation to build partnerships across the organization with a strong client focus. So I would invite you in the chat, just very quickly, just write one thing that you noticed as a strength or an opportunity for improvement for Samantha. So if you're her coach, or you are accompanying her in her development plan, or you're in charge of succession management in this case, what are you seeing as her strengths? Okay, so Daniel said capability to build long-term relationships. So 100%, this is probably the one that is the most natural transition for her, right? We see her in her Hogan inventories. This is someone who is highly relationship focused, who will really focus on the needs of others, probably has a curiosity to understand people. So this is someone who will really place the client's needs at the center of her actions, and probably strives to adopt that partnership approach with clients, right? So highly collaborative. Strength, someone said, Julie, supported by her likability, right? Someone said Froza, taking initiative and able to lead a team. So we see that with the high ambition. Okay, exactly. So Eileen, you're highlighting also getting a developmental opportunity. So you say that her mind is focused on the how rather than the what, not as strong as developing strategy herself. That's probably the biggest gap for her, is moving from that doer role to now a role where she needs to contribute to the strategy and the vision. And Louise says we'll need to hold others accountable. Okay. So we do see in this new role, she's probably going to be someone who's natural at developing people. As a leader, she'll probably take a very strengths-based approach to leading her team. So really wanting to understand, what are your aspirations? How can I support you to get there? She's probably someone who can name people's strengths quite easily, and will probably really leverage that strengths-based approach. A little bit more of a servant leader is what I see in her profile. The development for her would be, as someone said, holding people accountable, because we see in her profile that she might be more conflict averse, but also, and I often see this in leaders with her profile, it's not only that they might be hesitant to approach conflict, but they might be less likely to perceive it, because they tend to find very positive explanations to explain, people's mistakes or behavior that's unacceptable, right? So that very empathetic approach that assumes that someone has the best intentions. So holding people accountable is something else that would be a developmental opportunity for her. The strength, again, I like what Mara just said. So viewed as a trusted leader because of her high affiliation, probably the high altruism as well. So a trusting leader as well. And I'm trying to cover, I think we covered off all the areas actually. So her strengths and her gaps as well. And so now that we've highlighted those, and I would actually move forward to here, development tips. So what do we do about it? So the positive in this situation is that she's not in the role right now, and this is, she's been named or nominated as a successor, which means, and we don't have a time frame, but that does mean that, we have, potentially more time to develop her. If it's, 6 to 12 months, we don't really know, because it really depends on when her manager might vacate that position. And so we have a lot of time to really coach and develop her and give her access to the right opportunities. So if we look at those kind of 3 categories of what her new role is responsible at the director level, so client focus and building relationships, strategic orientation, and building high performing teams, what are some development tips you might give her? So what are some strategies that you might use or recommend to develop her in some of those areas? So I encourage everyone. So someone says, start to make herself more known and visible in the organization, right? Dana says, need to provide opportunities for her to work with others outside her own department. So both of you are on the same page. There's a meeting of the minds there because both of those comments really relate to one another. So giving her the opportunities. And then once the opportunities are there, we need to think about, what are the actions that she wants to lead by, because that will determine, what people start to think of her in those early interactions. Mira says, get a mentor. Which I think is especially, important, especially since we know that she's high affiliation, right? So she'll probably appreciate that mentorship approach. Julie says, find a way to participate in planning a more strategic change with others outside of her group. So exactly. So some of you, I like both of those last comments, actually, Mira and Julie, because it's giving her the opportunity, but also the mentor that can help give her advice and coach her to actually show up well once she's given the opportunity. Because if she's not thinking strategically right now, we don't want to necessarily kind of throw her in the deep end, because that could impact her reputation if she starts to flail right away. So we need to make sure that she has the right kind of support, resources, training first. Someone says, and Greg says, role play difficult situations that might crop up. So I would connect that to conflict management, holding people accountable. And Jonathan says set boundaries. So that is a good point. Not take on too much or overpromise, because she has that profile with the high adjustment and high prudence of someone who, and the high ambition, tends to take on a lot and can handle the pressure. Typically, I find with these profiles, they will still get everything done because that high prudence and the high ambition as well, but also to help her to focus on what are the key priorities, so that she's, with her limited time and energy, focusing on the right things that will help her to be successful and prepare her for that next level. Okay, so I'll start kind of one by one. So let's think about strategic thinking first. And so Terry just gave some recommendations. So first, sit in on strategy planning meetings. Right. So I think that depending on how that might be perceived, because here she's in a more, the role of an observer. And so we just want to make sure that if she's observing these meetings, that it doesn't impact her reputation if it's a culture where she's expected to kind of contribute right away and they value assertiveness. So we might want to keep that in mind. But someone else already said, a mentor as well. So is there someone else in the business that she can partner with that can expose her to the broader business? Because right now she's living in a little bit of a bubble. And are there opportunities in the organization, as someone else said, for example, a steering committee or a project that can expose her to engaging in some of those strategic decisions? But first, she really needs to, it's difficult with someone with her profile with a very strong operational mindset to start thinking strategically. So we need to expose her to what are kind of the questions that someone who's strong at this would ask, and what would they necessarily look for or notice within kind of an organizational kind of context. So what does she need to pay attention to? So maybe giving her structure and framework, given that she likes structure. Maybe using that approach would help her, because this is someone who works well within a structure. And the other relationships. So the relationships is something that she's probably more of a natural at, but I might want to balance that with political acumen. Because, with someone with her profile, if it is a relationship where there are a lot of different key players that might have kind of their own different intentions, this is someone who might be taken advantage of, might be seen as kind of too naive, which could undermine her credibility. So how do we get her to transition to a trust but verify approach? So what is it that she needs to do to really tune her radar? One thing is having a mentor, as someone said, that really understands the organizational context and the players, to help her to integrate, to help her to understand some of the implicit rules that she's probably not picking up on, because she probably sees the world through these really rose-colored glasses. And also we know that her natural kind of thinking style is to look at the best, assume the best in people. So having her to kind of, in a structured way, because she likes structure, thinking about, for different key players, what do I know about this person? What are their goals, probably based on their context? And so based on their goals and what I know of them, what might be their possible motivations, and we know she's going to think of, positive interpretations of their behavior, but forcing her to think of some alternative explanations. For developing talent, so there's developing others, holding them accountable, and as a couple of people have said, delegation. So she's not taking on too much herself. Right, so those are some opportunities for her. And someone said for holding people accountable, getting her comfortable giving difficult feedback in a respectful manner. And so I think someone else said practice using feedback as well, and maybe giving her a structure, because she's probably someone based on her profile who's not comfortable with ambiguity, who likes structure. And so giving her a structure for those conversations is a great idea because it gives her that comfort, something that she can lean on. I think what's interesting with people who have her profile is they tend to be more conflict averse, but they also have the skills to be able to deliver tough feedback in a very tactful way that respects the other person and that connects it to that person's needs. And when you give feedback to someone in a way where they know that you have their best interest at heart and you already have that trusting relationship, which you know she'll probably have with her team, they're more likely to be receptive to it. So also helping her to understand that broader context so that she already has those trusting relationships and she has the skills right now to be able to give that feedback in a tactful way that aligns with what's important to the other person. Okay. So thank you for participating in that case study. I hope it helped everyone to give them some ideas of how you might approach your analysis and how you might also integrate your understanding of low scores into your understanding of the individual. We still have a few other things that we'll bring to your attention and discuss, but thank you all for also participating and writing in the chat. I will just let Jag jump in right now.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Patricia. Absolutely a great session. The comments that are coming in, everybody's really enjoying this. The great thing is we're going to do this again in a couple months, and we're going to try and make this a constant thing that we do. Being able to kind of work with our Hogan certified practitioners to sharpen those skills is always great. And again, this went over very well. Thank you very much, Patricia. If anybody has any comments or concerns or questions, please go ahead. Feel free to add them into the group, and we can review them while we've still got everybody online. The great thing today is we're 17 minutes ahead of kind of where we needed to be. But yeah, if there's anything up that anybody wants to speak about, great. It looks like it's a wrap, Patricia. But again, we're going to be doing this out in a couple months again. You'll see those pieces show up. One of the things that I really wanted to make sure that we make everybody aware of, recordings and the presentation will be sent out. But this workshop really that we completed today talks about some of the advanced courses that we now offer. We've got advanced feedback, advanced interpretation, being able to make those connections, and that's about it. So if anybody's interested, please feel free to reach out. I think everybody I see on this list here has my contact info. But again, we will be sending you the deck, all of the items that come along with it, and make sure you kind of come out and take a look at our certifications, our advanced certifications for both feedback and advanced interpretation. Patricia?
Okay, perfect. And I'll just add, in case anyone is curious, for the advanced courses that we offer, the advanced interpretation is really when you take that, you're looking to take that expert posture, that will help you to make connections between the three inventories, understand the low scores as well. And advanced feedback, if you're in a role where you're using Hogan a lot to give feedback, so will help to provide you to give you a really good structure to create a positive participant experience and a very engaging experience for the participant and learn some feedback best practices.
That's
all right,
awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, we saw a question. Is this training available in French? The advanced certification and the advanced feedback are available in French. No problem. All right, Patricia, I'm going to knock off and I'll see you on Teams.
Okay, bye.
Bye.